Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a structural deep dive right into the cell. We're not just doing a standard biology review though. No, we're going to map out its organelles using a really specific lens, thinking of the cell as a continuously operating, highly organized living factory. Every single second, inside your body and in every living thing around us, these microscopic factories are humming with targeted, incredibly efficient activity. I'm so excited to guide you through this structural map.
Okay, let's dive right into this. As our source material perfectly puts it, a cell is like a tiny living factory, with each of its parts doing a specific job. I really want you to keep this specific metaphor in your head for the rest of our time together today. Because, just like a real-world manufacturing plant, a cell doesn't just do one thing in some giant empty room. It relies on a whole bunch of specialized departments, assembly lines, power generators, and waste disposal units, and they're all working in absolute perfect harmony. In biology, we call these specialized factory parts organelles. And what we're looking at here brilliantly illustrates the overall blueprint of our factory. It's a side-by-side map of a plant cell and an animal cell. Now, while they do have slightly different outer walls and maybe a few unique features depending on the organism, the core layout, it's actually remarkably similar. You can see various structures suspended inside there. Those are the organelles, our factory departments. And notice how they're distributed? They're not just randomly clumped together. They're highly organized. So our goal today is to walk through this map, department by department, to understand exactly how this incredible factory operates. To kick off our tour, we absolutely have to talk about the physical space where all of this magic happens. This is the cytoplasm. Think of the cytoplasm as the actual floor. It's this semi-fluid, kind of jelly-like substance that fills up the entire interior of the cell. But hey, it's not just empty space or useless goo. The cytoplasm is absolutely vital because it physically holds the whole thing together. It's the medium that suspends all of our organelles, allowing materials to travel between different departments so the factory can actually get its work done. Simply put, without the factory floor, there is no factory. Now, every successful factory needs a head office to store the master blueprints, right? So that brings us to section 1, the control center. Specifically, we're talking about the nucleus. The nucleus is, without a doubt, the undisputed CEO of the cell. It houses all the coded instructions, the DNA, that tell the cell exactly what it needs to build and how it needs to operate. And just like a high-security executive office, it is seriously well protected. It features a double-layered nuclear membrane packed with tiny pores for the transfer of very specific materials. Then deep inside that office is the nucleolus. That's the department that actively synthesizes ribosomal subunits and then ships them out through those pores straight to the manufacturing floor. Which brings us perfectly to our next stop. We're stepping out of the executive offices and walking right onto the main production floor for Section 2, manufacturing and assembly. We'll be focusing on the endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes. So here we are at a massive, sprawling piece of biological machinery known as the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short. It spreads like this complex network right through the cytoplasm. But here's the really fascinating part. It is physically continuous with the outer membrane of the nuclear envelope. It's literally as if the master assembly line is bolted directly onto the outside of the CEO's office. This brilliant design allows instructions from the nucleus to flow immediately and directly into the manufacturing network without any delay at all. Now, what's really interesting about this setup is that the endoplasmic reticulum actually has two completely distinct subdepartments, and each has its own highly specialized manufacturing role. First up, we have the rough ER. It literally looks rough or studded when you look at it under an electron microscope. Why? Because it is totally covered in ribosomes. This rough section is primarily involved in the heavy-duty manufacturing of proteins. If the cell needs to secrete a protein, the rough ER is exactly where it gets built. Then, on the flip side, we have the smooth ER. Just like the name suggests, it lacks those attached ribosomes, so it has a smooth appearance. The smooth ER handles entirely different products. It acts more like a chemical manufacturing plant, synthesizing and storing vital fats, which we call lipids, as well as hormones. So that's two very distinct assembly lines operating within one massive interconnected network. We keep mentioning ribosomes, so let's look at them directly. Remember earlier when we said the nucleolus inside the head office was building parts? Well, these are those parts. Ribosomes are the actual, physical workhorse machines of the cell's assembly line. Once their subunits are pieced together in the nucleolus, they travel out into the cytoplasm. A bunch of them will attach themselves to the rough ER, which again is what makes it rough, while others just float freely around the cell. But regardless of where they are hanging out, their job is singular and absolutely crucial. They synthesize proteins. They take those coded instructions straight from the nucleus and physically assemble the proteins that keep the cell and your entire body functioning. Of course, an assembly line of this massive scale, churning out proteins and lipids every single second, requires an immense amount of electricity to keep the machines running. And, naturally, it inevitably creates a lot of industrial waste. Let's look at how this cell handles both of these issues in Section 3, Power Generation and Cleanup, covering mitochondria and lysosomes. Meet the mitochondria. These are the absolute powerhouses of the cellular factory. Their structure is just perfectly adapted to their job. They have a porous outer membrane, but the real magic? That happens inside. The inner membrane isn't just a simple circle. It's highly folded into these finger-like projections called cristae. Now, why the folds? Well, because folds dramatically increase the surface area available inside the organelle. And in the biological world, more surface area means more space for vital chemical reactions to take place. Inside these mitochondria, the cell performs a process called cellular respiration. Basically, this is where the glucose from the food you eat is systematically broken down to release usable energy. So, the absolutely crucial point here is that the energy released by the mitochondria isn't just floating around randomly. No, it is meticulously packaged into a very specific molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP is literally the universal energy currency of the cell. Just like a real factory needs cash to pay for raw materials and labor, the cell spends ATP to fuel virtually all of its manufacturing activities, structural movements, and chemical processes. Quite simply, no mitochondria means no ATP, and no ATP means the factory completely shuts down. But what about the waste? Industrial accidents happen, parts get old, and byproducts inevitably build up. That is exactly where the lysosomes come in. Think of them as the factory's elite sanitation and recycling crew. Lysosomes are these tough, single-membrane-bound sacs filled with highly potent digestive enzymes. They constantly patrol the cytoplasm, hunting down unwanted or misfolded proteins, excess carbs, fats, and even entire worn-out organelles that have reached the end of their lifespan. They engulf the cellular garbage and break it all down into base materials that can be safely disposed of or even reused. Without lysosomes, our factory would quickly become a toxic dump, completely choked by its own debris. So far, we've covered the departments that almost all cells share. But some factories produce very specific goods and need specialized additions to get the job done. Let's look at two incredible specialized additions in Section 4, Specialized Departments, covering plastids and vacuoles. Plastids are a fantastic example of this kind of specialization. You're only going to find these in plant cells. Imagine a factory that doesn't even need to have raw energy shipped in, because it has an entire field of high-tech solar panels built right into its roof. That is essentially what plant cells do with plastids, specifically chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the organelles responsible for photosynthesis. They literally manufacture the cell's food using sunlight. But plastids aren't just for power. Plants also contain leucoplasts and chromoplasts, which act as specialized storage units for things like starches or provide those vivid colors you see in beautiful flowers and fruits. Let's move on and see how this builds our understanding of our final major organelle, the vacuole. Every factory needs a massive warehouse, right? Well, the vacuole is a prominent storage organelle. Now, in animal cells, they're often pretty small and temporary. But in plant cells, a single central vacuole can be absolutely massive, sometimes taking up most of the cell's entire volume. It stores water, nutrients, and waste products. But its job isn't just passive storage. By filling up with water, kind of like a tightly blown-up balloon, the vacuole provides essential structural rigidity to the plant cell. It acts as an internal pressure system that pushes against the outer walls, keeping the plant upright and firm. So when you see a plant wilting on your windowsill, you are actually looking at millions of cellular factories whose vacuole warehouses have just lost their water pressure. We've toured the executive offices of the nucleus, walked the ER assembly lines, seen the ribosomes hard at work, checked the power levels of the mitochondria, and inspected the specialized plant departments. And this brings me to a final thought for you to ponder today. We've seen just how interconnected all of this is. The nucleus needs the mitochondria for energy, the ER needs the nucleus for instructions, and the whole cell relies on the lysosomes to stay clean. So ask yourself, what happens to the whole living organism if just one of these microscopic factory departments shuts down? It's a pretty profound question, and it really highlights the delicate, perfect balance required to sustain life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you walk away today looking at the world around you and yourself with a whole new level of appreciation for the countless microscopic factories keeping us alive every single day.